good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from wherever you're joining us. And welcome to this breakout session. I am very delighted to have you all here today. And as Tricia said, my name is Polycarp Otieno, an education specialist with UNICEF Eastern and Southern Africa Regional Office based in Nairobi. And we are part of the KIX Africa 19 Hub. Today, I will be facilitating this discussion, which is part of a broader work supported by KIX, and will be focusing on out-of-school children and youth. And as you'd know, over the past 4 years, KIX has supported critical thematic work in this area. And we are excited to share the valuable insight from successful collaboration between researchers and policymakers. Specifically, we will showcase how evidence-based educational interventions have been scaled to reach out-of-school children and youth in Ghana. So the main objective of this breakout session is twofold, which include, number one, to present the thematic work supported by KIX on addressing out-of-school children and youth challenges, out-of-school youth challenges over the past 4 years. And the second objective is to highlight successful partnership between researchers and policymakers that have resulted in impactful solutions, particularly in Ghana. Through this session, we aim to provide practical insights into what works and how evidence can inform policies to scale educational options for out-of-school children and youth. And before we begin the sessions, I would just like to take a moment to brief you on the structure of the session. And for those who've been in the other breakout sessions, you would know that we start with a 40-minute presentation and dialogue between myself and the panelists. During this part, we will kindly ask you to keep your microphone and cameras off to minimize distractions. And after the presentations, we will open the floor for about 40 minutes interactive discussion. And during this time, you're welcome to participate by raising your hand, and I will call on you to unmute your microphone and camera and to ask your questions. At the same time, we also encourage you to post your comments and questions in the chat throughout the session, and we will address them during the discussion. I'm hoping that we are going to have a very interactive session because this is a very interesting topic. Now, for the first segment of the session, where I mentioned that we'll be having a discussion between myself and the panelists, we have 3 distinguished presenters, including Patrick Walugembe, who is a senior program officer at the International Development Research Center. We also have Leslie Casely-Hayford, Director, Associate for Change. And thirdly, we have Catherine Appiah-Pinkrah, who is the Director of Complementary Education Agency at the Ministry of Education, Ghana. We will also be having a discussant who is Keis, who is the thematic lead for equity and inclusion at the Global Partnership for Education. I will not go into their bios, but if you are interested to know or learn more about them, please, we have detailed speaker bios available on the KIX Symposium page, which we have just shared a link in the chat. So please do visit that. And with that introduction, I will now hand over the floor to Patrick to take us through his presentation, which is an overview of the thematic synthetic analysis of out-of-school children and youth. And Patrick, over to you. You have 7 minutes, please.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope you can hear me. My name is Patrick Walugembe. I work as a senior program officer with IDRC under the GPA KIX initiative. And in this presentation, I provide an overview of emerging evidence from a knowledge synthesis of 4 GPA KIX research projects, addressing the challenge of out-of-school children and youth and those at risk of dropping out. The research projects focused on various accelerated education programs, AEP models, and GPA KIX has funded several projects that are studying the scaling of promising or proven innovations that address education access and retention for all out-of-school children and youth, and those at risk. So in this presentation, we look at a synthesis of findings from 4 applied research projects. Nadia, next slide, please. So a bit of context. Worldwide, an estimated 251 million children and youth between the ages of 6 and 18 are out of school, with millions of others at risk of dropping out. With regional and contextual variations, this presents challenges to our efforts for education, access for all, and the situation further aggravates the inequity as many youths and children are left out based on socioeconomic status, gender, disability, etc. One of the most promising strategies to address the challenges involves accelerated education programs, AEPs, and interesting research, policy, guidance tools focusing on out-of-school children and youth and AEPs has only been increasing recently. And there remain gaps in data and understanding, including on how to support education for out-of-school children and youth at scale, learner outcomes beyond literacy and numeracy, alternative transition pathways to vocational training and livelihoods for youth, and gender equality, equity, and inclusion. Next slide, Nadia. So from 2021 to this year, 2024, GPA KIX supported 4 research projects to test, assess, develop strategies to develop and develop strategies to scale education innovations that can increase access to quality education for out-of-school children and youth and those at risk of dropping out. So the projects involved 11 partners and 15 countries. The map on your screen, as you can see, shows the geographic distribution of the projects in West Africa, in East Africa, and in Asia. All the research projects tested the effectiveness of these programs on learner access, retention, learning and empowerment, and gauging their wider impact on schools, teachers, parents, communities, and governments. And more than 30 accelerated education programs or approaches and practices were reviewed, providing input on what works and what needs to improve. These findings were used to inform government and other stakeholders about effective policy strategies and approaches so they can be replicated and scaled up. Next slide, Nadia. So we now look at some of the emerging lessons with a focus on 2 areas. Number one, the key features of accelerated education programs that have enabled their success as seen from these projects that we are discussing here. And secondly, the factors that influence the sustainable scaling of these innovations. The key features are summarized on the screen. I will not go through all of them, but a key highlight here is the ability of accelerated education programs to adapt to learners' needs in and out of education emergency contexts. They are flexible, age-appropriate programs that run in an accelerated time frame. And we see ministries of education beginning to integrate some core features of AEPs, such as flexible timetables, mother-to-child-based instructions, etc., within the formal education systems. Next slide. Thank you. Overall, the projects found that AEPs and enhanced school-based practices produce significant results at different levels. At the levels at the individual level, the school level, community level, and national level. At the individual level, for example, I'm not going to read everything, but I'll just pick out a few. At the individual level, for example, we see increased access to education for marginalized communities. In Nigeria, for instance, we see over 310,000 out-of-school children and youth that benefited from 5 accelerated education programs over a period of 7 years. And in terms of empowering learners, particularly girls, in Sierra Leone, we see AEP learners reporting empowerment, self-esteem, and confidence and as key outcomes. At the school level, for example, if you look at dropout rates are reduced, as seen in Bangladesh, where there is an 11% reduction in the dropout rates. At the community level, improved community engagement, such as in Nepal, where the engagement campaign significantly enhanced parent knowledge, beliefs, and self-efficacy in making positive change through school environments. In Ghana, where we see a reduction in a reduction in marriages of girls aged between 10 and 15 years. And at the national level, on the side of policies and guidelines on AEPs, the evidence of GPA KIX research has informed the development of government policies and guidelines on AEPs in countries like Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Sierra Leone, and in Tanzania. Next slide. So a key feature of the GPA KIX funded research projects is the need to facilitate an understanding of the scaling process. What does it take to scale these innovations? What does it take to scale the impact of the innovations or the effective solutions? So rich lessons have been learned in this line of scaling, and one of the most critical was the centrality of communities in these efforts. Intervention should serve as catalysts for what schools and communities are doing, and collaborative relationships at the level of schools and communities were critical to long-term sustainability and success. Equally important was the need to build partnerships at multiple levels of governments and across ministries and departments with responsibilities for children and youth. There is a continued need for more and better data on evidence, coordination, awareness, and advocacy on how to score children and youth. And governments and other actors need more analysis of cost effectiveness and of innovative education approaches to support them in scaling decisions. So the next presentation from one of the projects will be diving deeper into this. So I've not been able to go through everything, obviously, because of the time limitation. But if you need more to look at this synthesis report and download all the reports and read whatever is coming out of this synthesis work, research work, please visit the GPA KIX website. I believe it's also posted in the chat. Thank you so much. Over to you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for the very concise presentation. Stuck to 7 minutes, and thank you for also highlighting that successful strategies for reaching our school children and youth ought to be both inclusive and flexible, whether these are through accelerated timelines, community-based approaches, and cost-effective solutions. And of course, I would also like to emphasize that when you emphasize on collaborative impact, I found that particularly insightful. So thank you very much, and I would now turn to Leslie, who will share findings from the KIX Applied Research Project in Ghana. And over to you, Leslie, another 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to take us through a bit of the evidence, but also how this evidence informed policymakers as well as practitioners in the Ghana context. And thank you, Catherine, for joining today. I know. So basically, in promoting a culture of evidence, we took as many pathways as possible to scaling up and to ensuring that there was a nexus between policymakers as well as the evidence producers. So at the national level, we created an enabling environment. I think we can go to the next slide. This enabling environment included an important policy-making learning group, which was called the PLWC, the Policy Learning Working Group, which was chaired by the Chief Director and co-chaired by Appiah-Pinkrah, who is the director of the Complementary Education Agency. And basically what happened in the last few years was that Policy Learning Working Group was able to take the evidence that we were generating over the 4-year period and use it to inform evidence that they were using for out-of-school children, the numbers of out-of-school children that were being defined in Ghana, as well as other parts of the West Africa. But most importantly, they were looking at the innovations that were taking place both in civil society as well as the government rollout of the complementary education program, which is equivalent to accelerated education programs on the continent. So the main objectives of this were to help the national level engage with the KIX research that was going on in Ghana. Here you can see the main focus of it was to increase access to learning for children who are out of school through strengthening use of knowledge in effectiveness on accelerated education programming. And over the 4 years that we were working with this evidence base and developing it, we were really working on 3 tiers of evidence. One was the effectiveness of the innovations that were going on in Ghana, which was based on generating the knowledge on effectiveness in terms of how much these innovations were contributing to access for girls, for children with disability, as well as remote area children that were in rural and conflict zones. We were also trying to establish how AEP programs could better adapt to the context of extreme poverty and where there was conflict and fragility, inadequacy of teachers. And finally, we tried to build the capacity of analysts within the Ministry of Education and the Ghana Education Service to adopt and scale up these innovations by supporting CEA as well as other innovators that are in the space in Ghana that includes civil society. Next, please. So just to quickly run through, I'm not going to, no, we won't go to that one. We'll go to the next one. I don't want to define what AEPs are because I think many of you probably know already, but generally speaking, they include speed schools, they include complementary education pathways. I think one of the most important findings was on the learning outcomes. And after we realized that these AEPs had been in school at primary and junior and senior high school, we were testing their comprehension as well as their basic literacy and foundation literacy outcomes, and found that within the 1 year of complementary basic education, they were at an equivalency of P3 learners. 50 to 55% of them could comprehend based on international assessment testing. And then we were comparing them as well with schools that did not have and learners that did not have access to accelerated education programming. Next. So the learning outcomes were a major focus of this policy dialogue that we had at national level. There was impact on parents and learners, and most importantly, as Patrick has mentioned, the socio-cultural practices that were working within the communities, especially the forced and child marriage issue. In northern Ghana, this is a common practice for girls between 15 and 17, or even younger. And we were finding that the AEP programs were prolonging and in some cases stopping early to child marriage. So that exposure, the parents' attitudes were changing, their practices were changing within the background of complementary basic education. Next slide. Most important was we were trying our best to message the most important issues that policymakers are concerned with, which is the cost of these innovations. So from year 1 to year 4, there was a mainstreaming of the issue of cost efficiency and effectiveness. From year 1, we took secondary data sets to look at the costs in relation to what 1 year of primary education would cost in Ghana, as well as what it would cost if they were in the accelerated education programs. Right to the end of this research, we are now doing cost studies on the cost of not investing. So in the case of Ghana and Nigeria, we've just come out with a paper on that. And again, these were the modalities we were looking at. Final slide, I want to dwell on the how, the interface between policymaking and the next one. This one, I just wanted to mention that one of the most important interfaces that we had in the 4 years was we had a team of policymakers that came to Ghana in June of 2024 with the support of KIX to really expose and also interrogate the evidence base that we were building both in Ghana and West Africa. Catherine's team developed that policy interface for a 2-day interface, and the KIX Hub 19 supported with others. But generally speaking, the pathways that we've been developing with the policy learning working group at the national level, we've also realized in our scaling research that we have to also embrace the community and meso level. Just as the Kenyans did yesterday, we recognize that without a place in which we can expose and sustain these innovations with the innovators, it's difficult to prolong that evidence base in terms of convincing policymakers or to expose the data that is being generated. So at the international level, we've been working again with the KIX Hub, the AEWG, the IICBA, as well as in the countries we've been working in. With Ghana's case, we worked with the Ghana National Education Coalition campaign to help the processes of reforming and rewriting some of the CESA, the Continental Education Strategy, as well as looking at the national strategies that we're embracing out of school children. finally, just on the issue of the communities, we are now using some of the Brookings research in terms of helping develop scaling labs in these 3 countries as a way of transitioning to another stage of the research and sustaining the evidence base within the Ghana context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie, for the insightful presentation as well, and for showcasing the accelerated education programs and how especially it's transforming the landscape in Ghana. Again, the cost effectiveness in achieving foundational learning, which is a critical piece of the puzzle in the learning crisis, is again very much appreciated. And of course, we do all this research to help governments move or improve their education system. So Dr. Catherine, who is the director in the Complementary Education Agency, would like to know from you, from a policy maker perspective, what are some of the practical reflections that you've had having engaged with the KIX project in its implementation? Please, would you share some insights with us? You have 7 minutes as well. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Good morning from my side of the world. We have a lot to share when it comes to partnerships and how complementary education have been partnering with organizations to make sure that we push policies, and particularly in the area of research and advocacy, to make sure that we get the necessary resources to push our agenda. And so I would like to share with you these few remarks. My colleagues, partners, and stakeholders. As I said, it's really a privilege to join this symposium to share how the CEA, in partnership with organizations, particularly with Associates for Change, has made remarkable strides in expanding access to out-of-school children across West Africa and improve the quality of education for rural and marginalized children. I must say our collaboration has been pivotal in shaping policies, advancing research, and implementing impactful programs under the Ministry of Education, where CE falls. These years together, we have been working as partners for over the last 5 years before CEA was even inaugurated from the non-formal status to an agency status. Associate for Change worked with the non-formal, that is the former CEA division, in the 90s and was instrumental in helping shape the complementary education policy in Ghana. I would like to share with you areas where we have actually collaborated in leadership in pushing policy forward. As a co-chair, as Leslie highlighted, of the Policy Learning Group, alongside the Chief Director of the Ministry of Education, I have personally witnessed firsthand how this platform has transformed the policy landscape for education in Ghana. The Policy Learning Group, as chaired by the Chief Director and myself, has been instrumental in supporting the evidence generation under the KIX GP-funded research projects titled, and I quote, "Increasing Access to Quality Education for Rural and Marginalized Children in West Africa," unquote. The membership, which includes the government key stakeholders in the Ministry of Education, as well as the Ghana Education Service, alongside with civil society coalition members, particularly from the GNEC and NNED, as Leslie said, and also with some key accelerated education innovators. These include School for Life, Afrikids, and then Gilbert. Together, we have harnessed research evidence to address critical questions about the effectiveness of accelerated education programs and girls-focused initiatives in Ghana. Also, not in Ghana alone, but we also have in Nigeria and Sierra Leone. These findings have shaped national strategies such as the legislative instrument development and the CBE policy review, and directly influenced key policy decisions regarding allocations to complementary basic education in the subsector. Moreover, CEA worked closely with AFC to provide vital evidence that supported the development of the legislative instrument for complementary basic education. We contributed to workshops and panels, including ensuring that our policies are well grounded in data and best practices. Most recently, we collaborated and with Associate for Change, where we nominated them to join or appointed them to join the National Steering Committee, which is currently overseeing the CBE curriculum reform, providing important inputs to the process, which is we're expecting to have it done by March next year. In the area of advocacy, through our collaborative efforts, CEA and AFC have made several presentations to the Minister of Education, highlighting the importance of scaling up sustainable financing for CBE to meet the just 1% target of basic education budget each year. I'm particularly proud of two key policy papers developed during the GPE design process, which were presented by CEA and FCA to the minister, who then requested for more institutionalization of CBE in Ghana. Both of us went to the minister. We actually did a very good presentation, which caught the eye and attention of the minister. The first paper presented the evidence for scaling up AEPs and CBE as a key strategies for addressing the out-of-school numbers in Ghana, which now stands approximately at 1.2 million children. The second paper detailed the critical steps required to institutionalize CBE process within the government structure. Both papers, I'm glad to say, provided a compelling case for enhanced financial and structural support for CEA, and we are very grateful with the kind of partnership that we had with Associate for Change. These documents not only strengthen advocacy for increased funding to reach more than 20,000 children on a yearly basis, but to also position CEA to systematically address the out-of-school children challenge in Ghana as a key driver of change in the education sector. Now, this is something that we did that was so successful this year. That was the high-level conference on tackling the out-of-school challenge in West Africa. Another key platform developed for addressing the out-of-school challenge in West Africa was the collaboration between the Complementary Education Agency and Associate for Change, who successfully co-organized a high-level conference in June 2024, just this year, with support from GPE, KF's, IDRC. I think my time is running up. This conference brought together over 80 participants from the countries in West Africa, building on Accelerated Education Working Group Conference in Senegal in 2020. These countries included Ghana, Mali, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. The focus of the conference was CBE and accelerated education programs as solutions to this pressing issue. The event created an invaluable platform for cross-country dialogue, enabling us to share best practices and harmonize our approaches to reaching marginalized children. In fact, it was a testament to what can be achieved through collaboration and collective action. Now, looking forward, we're looking at scaling up our research. I'm excited about the scaling research lab that CEA and AFC are developing currently based on the community-driven approach in the Yindi district in Ghana. This initiative will focus on using community-driven approaches to expand educational access and quality to out-of-school children. The lab will allow us to gather evidence on the impact of the community contributions towards CBE in areas where the reach and funding is limited through grassroots methods, and will serve as a blueprint for scaling up such approaches across other districts and regions in Ghana. It is my hope that this initiative will pave the way for a more inclusive and sustainable education system. In concluding, I want to take this opportunity to thank all our partners, especially Associates for Change, for their unwavering support, research evidence, and collaboration over the last few years. Together, we have made significant progress, but our work is far from done. With the continued momentum of partnerships like ours, I'm confident that we will not only sustain alternative pathways for education in Africa, but expand our impact, ensuring that no child is left behind in their pursuit of education. On this note, I would like to thank you sincerely for your attention, and I look forward to our continued journey towards equitable education for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Catherine, for a very insightful reflection. In fact, when you started off with what this collaboration meant to you, you talked about working as partners and not the research being prescriptive of what or to what government should do. You also talked about Associate for Change being invited to the steering committee to support with the review of the curriculum, which is very monumental. And I also like the part of joint advocacy on sustainable financing, because if we have to tackle the 100 million kids who are out of school in the continent, then we have to find sustainable solutions. And the insight on institutionalization of the CBE, a call from the minister, just shows how much the collaboration has gone. So to help us put the dots together from what Patrick presented to what Leslie did and to the reflections by Dr. Catherine, I'm going to invite our discussant, Joe Keis, to help us with that. Joe, you have 5 minutes, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Polycarp, and thank you for this opportunity. Really, on behalf of the GP Secretary, just very pleased to be able to serve, play this discussant role, and I think further explore some of the key takeaways and salient points from the respective presentations from Patrick, Leslie, and Dr. Catherine. I thank you to the three of you, I think, for these very, thoughtful, enriching presentations. And so I think for me, I just wanted to share some general takeaways where I saw some overlap, and I think some key points that wanted to reflect on more deeply. And in terms of translating research policy really to uptake into national systems, I mean, just really hearing how it's so important that it requires the engagement of national stakeholders in research evidence generations, and really from the beginning in terms of the conceptualization phase of the research all the way through to the dissemination phase, to ensure, I think, that national ownership and appropriate uptake. And I think, Leslie, to your point, I think really ensuring that process doesn't stay at the central level, but is actually a process that goes down to the decentralized and local level as well. And I think that's really essential if you want to be able to successfully translate that research to uptake at the policy level. And then also just investing in robust communication and advocacy strategies. I think that was really a salient point that we heard from Leslie and Dr. Catherine, was really, ensuring that government partners and national stakeholders are key advocacy partners and not simply recipients of this messaging, right? So that they are really part of this process and not just beneficiaries, quote unquote, of this work this research that's happening at national level. And then reflecting on looking at kind of how can drive the institutionalization and scalability of AEPs. I think that there was a really important point that was made around ensuring that evidence through research on learning and retention is linked to cost effectiveness effectiveness to effectively be able to engage in policy dialogue. I think without that link to cost effectiveness that was well highlighted, I think in Leslie's presentation, you can have a very successful intervention, but it will hit a wall when engaging with the government, exploring ways to take that to scale. And then also investing in coordination, within the education sector broadly, from national to subnational levels of government, to ensure that policy is effectively implemented at the local level, but then also investment in interministerial coordination across relevant line ministries that are supporting efforts to integrate out-of-school children and youth. I think that's really important and also extremely challenging. And then we're looking at driving sustainability. I think the first thing that comes to mind is domestic financing, and really, I think linking that to policy dialogue and to evidence and data, right? And so to be able to sustainably scale these interventions that have been vetted through research, governments need to be able to commit financing to make that feasible. But for them to be able to make that commitment, there needs to be that cost and effective evidence and that commitment to being able to put that in national budgets. And then I think what really emerged very strongly from the different speakers is this point of localization or community engagement and community buy-in, that these programs, interventions to sustainably reach out-of-school children and youth at scale will never be fully achieved without ownership and buy-in from communities, which is really important, especially in contexts where affected by crisis and fragility. And then ensuring coherence and complementarity between the formal system and AEPs, right? And ensuring that AEPs have that catalytic effect on national systems and aren't seen as something that's just parallel or even in competition to national systems, or really part of a larger umbrella of interventions that meet the contextual needs of learners and really support the resiliency of national systems. And then maybe very quickly, some points on GP's work in this space on supporting children and youth. And the principle of leaving no child behind is a central pillar of GP's 2025 strategy and will continue to be so in the 2030 strategy. And when we look at supporting children that are out of school, taking an intersectional approach to that analysis and looking at the multiple and overlapping personal factors and societal factors that can create challenges for children to access schooling. And really looking at that through a systems lens, right? And looking at the link between access, equity, and learning in a process of inclusive dialogue that ideally just doesn't happen at the national level within the leg, but is also inclusive of these diverse voices of these marginalized groups that need to be taken in consideration. And I think that real opportunity within GP's operating model is when you look at GP's operating model, one of the first steps that countries must go through before they define kind of a priority reform that they want to pursue, which could be out-of-school children. They have to look at data and evidence, gender, sector coordination, and domestic financing. And I think those are four critical pillars that must be taken into account when we're looking to scale national systems that address national strategies that address out-of-school children. So I think that there's a real opportunity to leverage GP's operating model through that analysis to ensure that the evidence coming from KIX is really informing the policy dialogue on the enabling factors analysis through GP's operating model to ensure that systems transformative approaches that are striving to reach out-of-school children really are driven by that data and evidence. And I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ja, for your reflection and which have been very insightful, and for helping us to join the dots between evidence, equity, and cost-effective policy. And once again, also emphasizing on the fact that if we are to not leave any child behind, then we have to have sustainable but also localized solutions. Thank you very much for that. I'm looking at the time that we have left, and maybe I just have one question for our panelists before we transition into the discussion with our participants. So maybe I'll start with you, Leslie, because we are talking about the fact that you could translate the results that were coming from your research into now informing policy across government. So beyond individual relationship, how can we promote cultures of evidence use within education systems? Please, 2 minutes for you.
Thank you very much, Polycarp. I think it's a complex issue when you look at the culture of policymaking, especially in the current political animal we're in at the moment in West Africa. Research is changing. The space on which we can work with research is also changing. So we need definitely champions of change within the context of the government and civil society. So when we're looking at a culture in which evidence is being used, you need civil society. And that means that you have to improve the context in which civil society is able to push some of the levers in which government is looking at questions like out of school children or taking up the need for accelerated education in a context like Ghana, Nigeria, or what have you. The civil society movement has to be capacitated to do that, as well as media, the media practitioners. Most importantly, the champions of change within the government sector. We have the Complementary Education Agency, who has many champions that are working on this issue, Catherine and others. But we also have to spread our wings within the ministerial levels, within the senior analyst level. We even had on our team during this research, we had senior analysts for the first time moving to areas in the extreme poverty zones, and then coming back to the ministry to inform them about the fact there was no school within 2 to 3 kilometer radiuses. It's important with this culture that we move on each platform, national, meso level, and community level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie, for that calling on everyone, at least having a champion, first of all, but also moving at the national level and also at other levels. So that brings us to the end of the first segment of our discussion this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're joining us from. And we will now go into discussion with the audience, and we look forward to hearing your reflections, questions, and comments. And as a reminder, please raise your hand if you would like to speak. I will call on you to unmute whenever you have a question. Then we also encourage you, for the interest of time, if you have a question that you could put in the chat, we could do that, and my colleague Sophie will help us in reading those out. So let's begin. Is there anyone who would like to pose a question to any of our panelists, either Leslie or our government colleagues from Ghana? That is the Complementary Education Agency. The chance is yours.
Polycarp, would you have a question? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I see there is Hala Noor, whose hand is up. Please, you can unmute and then pose your question. If it is a general question, we will ask any of the panelists to come in on it, or if it is directed to one of them, please also feel free. Over to you.
Hala. Hi. Hi,
Hala.
everyone.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Hala Noor. I am from Sudan. Unfortunately, Sudan has been announced as the world crisis now in education. We have around 19 million children out of school because of the conflict going in Sudan. Unfortunately, the war feeds on these children who are out of school. And we need to move the government, we need to move civil society, we need to move everyone towards supporting the return of these children to schools. My question is to Leslie, what actions can we do to start? Where should we start? With civil society, with governments? Where's the start point for us as Sudanese to push for the return of these children to schools? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hala, for this question. And we'll take another one from Nasrin Sidika. So Sidika, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a great discussion, and I have a question to Patrick, I think the first speaker. Yes, so here you mentioned about the high rate of early marriage and other social barriers, including Bangladesh, as well as we have the high rate of early marriage case here. So we are maybe the second or third in position in the world. So my question is, and also the dropout rate is high. So my question is, so how are you thinking or planning to engage the dropout students so that early I mean, the mother and also those who already dropped from the school for 2-3 years back or after COVID, they could not come back. So how could you engage them with the regular schooling system? We can develop the school system and other thing, but as there is a huge gap, how can they get back? What is the policy you are thinking about? Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much for these two questions. Hala from Sudan is asking, where do they start with 19 million children out of school? And the government protagonists seem to not be coming to an end. So, Leslie, that is to you. And the second question goes to Sidika. Please, fellow dear participants, please feel free to write your questions in the chat. And Sophie, please keep monitoring if you have any question that we need to bring to the attention of our panelists. Over to you, Leslie.
Thank you. And thank you for that question. There's no time to lose, really, when you look at a country like Sudan, Somalia, Burkina Faso. These are countries that need to understand what the evidence base is. And we've developed this evidence base thanks to GP KIX across several countries globally. And now there's a synthesis report ready to go. So I would suggest, in terms of not wasting too much time, to begin with a webinar, maybe facilitated by the Hub 19, and that we work on a webinar basis with the government officials as well as the coalitions. We need to make sure the coalitions and those that are in the NGO space are able to scale up this model, even in a small way. In Somalia, the CARE USA is doing it. In Burkina Faso, Strom Foundation. In Ethiopia, Luminous is involved. So within the context of Africa, the scaling process is going on in fragile and conflict-affected areas. We're working as well with KIX GP in the next 2.5 years as well in Borno State, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and the Upper East of Ghana. I think it's important to start the sharing of the evidence with the policies that we've developed so we can share that with you, and then move on to a webinar and, if possible, a workshop. We're about to do a workshop in Niger State in February because the government is inviting us to help plan and budget with them how to scale up accelerated education in Niger State. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie, for this response. Maybe Patrick, you want to come in before we go over again?
Yes, I think the question she has asked, my colleague has asked, I think that's Nazrin, yeah, that you've asked. I think the question to all of us that are involved in this work, we come from, myself, we come from the side of research and from the side of research and generating evidence. However, your question, I think, is quite relevant to all of us because one of the key elements of these programs is that beyond just retention, beyond having programs that address the issue of out of school, we also need to think about reintegration, especially in places where we have emergency and that. And I think the research, if I recall well, and Leslie, you could come in this, I think we have some very good evidence here that shows successful programs that have integrated. And I think they still go back to what I talked about. It still goes back to what I talked about when I mentioned the key features of the AAP programs. Things like, being flexible, the elements around community engagement, All these things are very, very important for you to have a very successful program that addresses reintegration. I would ask a colleague who is speaking more, who is really in the field, a person maybe like Leslie or anyone from the Bangladesh team that is the team that is implementing in Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan to come in. If you have any addition to what I'm saying, thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Indeed, this is a very open question to all of us. We have to understand, or first of all, identify who are these children who are dropping out, where they, and what is causing them to drop out, and then we can be able to tailor-make what interventions we bring to them. Before the colleagues from Bangladesh come in, I just wanted to have a follow-up to Leslie on where we start. You mentioned that we start with sharing evidence, and you mentioned during your initial intervention that you did have a regional exchange with countries, some that are already deep in crisis that would parallel Sudan. Maybe you may want to give insights to what was the reception of countries, especially north of Sahel. I think you mentioned at some point Mauritania. So if you could give some ideas of the reception, because if you giving guidance that or advice that we start with sharing evidence, what was the reception in the country that would be looking like Sudan, so that Hala could already start having a feel of what the government of Sudan or the authorities in Sudan would think of this step. Yeah.
Well, the most impactful interface that we had, thanks to KIX, was the June conference where we brought Burkina Faso, Ghana, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone and Mali together. And some of those countries have a lot of experience. Mali and Burkina have the most experience in terms of scaling up accelerated education in the continent or in the West African subregion. Now, with that face-to-face 2-day conference, Niger State came along on their own expense and went back with one of our consulting teams and began to process a plan of action for Niger State. And they've gotten quite far. Their evidence base has been developed with a baseline and mapping study on out-of-school children, and the numbers have gone from about 680,000 to about 1-point-something million. So they're ready now because they've had this face-to-face. And I think that this is another thing. You end up having to do a 1 or 2 day face-to-face with the governments. We can start off on the Zooms, but it ends up having to be a more planning and consultative meetings. I think Patrick can speak to that. We came together with decision makers, and we've invited a very few numbers in this June meeting, but there was enough synergy to push a little bit on the evidence base in order for them to act. And Borno State and others are also there. So I think there's a need for some quick face-to-face when governments are making a decision on how they're going to invest in this. We also had some investors at this conference. So it's important that governments have options. And I know Catherine has spent a lot of time bringing in investors to Ghana from different places. Sierra Leone has also attracted investment from Qatar funds and others. But it needs to have an international pull down on funds for out of school children, which I know GP and others are looking at. And thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leslie. And Hala, I would imagine that you got a good entry point, that the first entry point would be a face-to-face dialogue on what evidence shows. Sometimes, as we talk about evidence and policy action, sometimes there is a discontinuity. And maybe at that point, this is an open question to all of us, Patrick, Leslie, and our team from the Complementary Education Agency in Ghana. I know Catherine has left, but Emmanuel, you can jump in, or Patrick, you can jump in at any point, or Joe. How can knowledge and evidence that we produce from all this research be shared in order to be used to maximize impact? I know sometimes we become very technical and do not necessarily share synthesis that can be consumed. So how do we package this? And this is an open question to any of us. I would maybe start with Choa, if you would like to.
Yeah, thanks, Polycarp. I mean, I think that there's several entry points. I think coming from GPE, obviously we're going to look at the local education group as an entry point for us, right? And ensuring that that the findings that you have are translated in a way that's going to really be understood within the local education group partners. But I also think that there's other avenues as well, especially when we're looking at humanitarian contexts. There are other avenues for engagement and looking, for example, at the education clusters, which are the humanitarian groups that work in specific sectors, and then also do quite a bit of research globally in certain areas, and that have a lot of evidence on out-of-school children and approaches that work in these kind of contexts. So I think that there's certainly regional conversations, as Leslie highlighted, are extremely important. And I think that there's also a global element to that of, I think, knowledge and data that's there around out-of-school children in humanitarian contexts that can be leveraged as well in a dedicated working group to support that. So I think a lot of that can then be channeled through the local education group or the education cluster, who I think, coming again to coordination, really need to work together closely on addressing issues of out-of-school children, because I do think that this issue of out-of-school children, it really spans what we call the humanitarian development nexus, right? It's not black and white. It's not like in a country context you have only children that are out of school because of a crisis, or only children that are out of school because of more developmental or structural factors. So I think it really spans that nexus, and it can actually be a great entry point to engage humanitarian development partners to be talking about how are we working together to respond to this needs that spans both contexts, and how are we harmonizing our strategies in a coherent way through the government where possible, to make sure that we are kind of coming together with one strategy based on evidence and data that we know works. And I think that's really an opportunity where the leg can play that role. So yeah, I'd love to hear from others as well, but thank you.
Thank you very much. And Patrick, do you have any addition to that? What way or how can we better package knowledge that we synthesized to be able to maximize impact that comes from it?
I don't know if it's this Patrick or the other Patrick.
So it's you, Patrick, and then there is also Patrick and Tim. I would also
Yeah,
invite
okay.
Tim at some point.
Yeah, so yes, but I think Joe, in your first remarks, I think you hinted on this, and one of the things, I mean, there are many things that my colleagues can say from the field, and people have done that. But I think one of the things that I've seen that has really worked for some of the programs, the applied research programs that have ensured use, I think is the bit where we do co-creation. I happened to attend that high-level conference in Accra, in Ghana, and one of the things I really loved about the dialogue and the discussion that happened there is really how frank and open every team. These some of the people that presented there were, and reflecting on where they had been with the project. They're not just coming in the project at the point of dissemination, but they've been working with the projects right from the beginning and in different ways. With the project, there was an element of co-creation. I think that really is a key to enable uptake, the use and use of the evidence. So for me, it's a very, very big ingredient. But I want to leave it up to my colleagues who are very, very like directly involved in programs in the field. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Co-creation, you build trust very early on. When you're designing your research, you know what you are looking forward to. When numbers start popping up, there is an acceptance. So it helps to improve the uptake of evidence. So I don't know, Sophie, if we have anything from the chat that we need to respond to. Oh, please go ahead.
We had one question. Could you please describe the key elements of accelerated education programs? What is the content covered to achieve impact, and what is the program duration?
Thank you very much, Sophie. And I think this would be directed to our colleagues from the Complementary Education Agency. Is Emmanuel or Patrick and Tim, are you here to take that? Could you please describe the key elements of accelerated education programs And specifically, while doing that, what content is covered among out-of-school children and youth to achieve the stated impact, and what is the program's duration? Emmanuel or Patrick and team? Okay, so in the absence of the CARE, Leslie, would you be open to sharing that as you've collaborated with them?
Yeah. The key elements of accelerated education programs contain most of the content is related to foundation learning, which is the basics of literacy, numeracy, and life skills in mother tongue. Most countries deal with 1 year, which is equivalent to about P2 level. So they skip KG, P1 and 2, and they're re-entered at P3. Other models are collapsing the primary school system from 6 years into 3 years. And that's the speed school model. Again, sometimes it's in mother tongue, sometimes it's in English. But foundation to the major element of complementary basic education and accelerated, it's community driven. It has a very strong community oversight and accountability. The teachers and the facilitators are often from the community. Like in the Ghana case, it's only from the community. They don't travel. They're from the community, selected by the community to develop their own capacity to deliver a complementary basic education. And it ranges from, like I said, in Nigeria's case, we have 3 levels of accelerated education, so they can transition all the way up to junior high school and write their exams at the end. In the case of Ghana, we only have 1 level, so they transition into P2 or P3, usually P3. And they're equivalent. They have testing we've done, and it's equivalent. Their comprehension of competencies are equivalent to that P3 level after having 1 year of complementary. So the elements, the language is mother tongue. Yeah, usually. Although minority groups sometimes adopt a second language, but it's not as effective. The most effective curriculum is in the mother tongue, no matter what minority group it is. We're in about 15 to 16 languages in Ghana, in Nigeria as well. The government has several languages that is adopted, and minority, not always part of the Ghana Education Service system, but additional to it.
Yeah,
And the
thank you very
facilitators
much.
have to speak, read, and write.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leslie. And also emphasizing, I think what Patrick Walbengo mentioned at the beginning, that all these results can only be hinged or anchored to flexibility of these alternative programs. If you keep them rigid, then you do not get the results. Sophie, do we have more questions from the chat?
We do. We have 2 more questions. The
Sure.
first one is, can you mention some key factors that have worked best for engaging local communities and parents to achieve re-entry into school for out-of-school children in the different projects you were involved in? Do you want me to read the other one?
Yes, you could. And maybe we could ask our colleagues in Bangladesh, is there somebody to come in on that question? Can you mention some key factors that have worked best for engaging local communities and parents to achieve re-entry of out-of-school children in the projects you were involved in?
Maybe Leslie?
Doug?
Okay, one of the key factors is related to actually girls' re-entry. In the 2 girls-focused programs that had over 20,000 girls went through this in Ghana's case, called the STAGE program, funded by FCDO and delivered by 10 NGOs in Ghana. We had about 20,000 beneficiaries, and the re-entry process included CBE and a short income generation program. Most of these girls were teenage mothers across the country. And without the income generation component, our research found that they would not have been able to re-enter. 90% of them re-entered. We're just doing the final conclusion on the completion rates of these girls, a high proportion of those girls that re-entered completed primary, but fewer, less than 40%, 50%. We're just doing the final conclusion on the junior high school level and the senior high school level. The reasons being is because there's a higher proportion of those that are being pushed into early marriage at those levels. Although CB makes a very important contribution to prolonging it, but income generation is one facilitating factor, and it's not a one-year program. It's about a 2 or 3 month income generation skills development. And that made a difference to those that were moving into the re-entering. BRAC proved the same in Sierra Leone. The BRAC program, again, the girls were not intended to re-enter, but they re-entered because they aspired to go back to school, even though the program was not focused on that. But BRAC built their capacity in one skill to sustain their ability to stay in primary and junior high school, and many of them ended up in senior high school. The majority went to senior high school in the BRAC model.
I could add to that. From the synthesis report, there's a very good example of what's happening in Nepal regarding community engagement, where there's been a lot of engagement campaigns and advocacy, and one of the key results that we see in the synthesis report is a significant enhancement of the parents' knowledge and their beliefs, and like I mentioned earlier, the self-efficacy, and they've been supporting schools, the school environment, making positive change within the schools. So I think that's another example, one of the key factors that could be highlighted in how to engage local communities through the very, very aggressive engagement campaigns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, the issue of localization and building into community needs. I think we have another question which more or less builds into what Leslie has just said about income generating activities, but this is with an angle to the parents. So the question is, one of the primary reasons children remain out of school is poverty, which often forces them to work to support their families. How are you addressing this challenge when bringing children back to school? Are you implementing alternative livelihood programs or income generating activities for parents to reduce their reliance on children's earnings? So I think you could give this from a Ghana perspective. If we have a Nepalese or Bangladesh perspective, we could take this. So do we start with you, Patrick? Or Leslie, if there is no field experience on this. Leslie, you could give some insight on the parental aspect.
Yes, our research showed that there's a shift in the last 5 to 10 years towards the child, especially at junior high school. The responsibility that's being given in extreme poverty zones is towards the 12 to 15-year-old, whether they're female or male. And it is an important finding from research that parents are not just giving up, but they're placing more and more responsibility on children. Now, I would agree that alternative livelihoods is the way forward. And I think USAID is trying within the agri sector to improve livelihoods. AP programs cannot do everything. So we need to make the link to bilateral and other funding that is going on in the agri sector to improve livelihoods of parents. But it's a long haul. And I would say that in northern Ghana and what I've seen in Burkina and other places, they just don't have the broadband to allow that. They're pushing their kids into the workforce at a young age or into early marriage, and that is the way out for them. So I would say that these programs have to embrace savings and credit and income generating, not just for parents, but also for children. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leslie. I think it works both ways because some of the challenges stem from the poverty situation. So if you are addressing children needs or youth needs without addressing parents, then it ends up in a zero-sum game. So it will be important that these programs work both ways. I see Patrick Tumasi has an hand up. I don't know, you want to come on in a question or you want to share some reflections from the Complementary Education Agency, Ghana. Please, the floor is yours. Patrick, you have the floor. While Patrick is taking the floor, Hala is just mentioning that this is an important conversation. And yeah, we do hope that we could find solutions for Sudan, because having nearly all eligible children not being in school is quite immoral. And we hope that the steps that Leslie you suggested, starting from evidence, and we have evidence also showing that even if the rate of children out of school keeps on going down, then because of the population growth that we are having, the absolute numbers will keep on rising. So for countries like Sudan, would really need to find solutions for them.
Yes, this is Patrick here.
Yeah, Patrick,
yes.
Please take the floor.
Yes. The issue of empowering the parents in ensuring that the children are kept in school and they don't drop out, and also those who are also out of school can be get into the classroom. About 4 or 5 years ago, we had a same collaborative program with the CARE Ghana to some cocoa growing areas to ensure that some parents were empowered vocationally and then given money to establish themselves so that they can be financially viable, so that they can support their children to stay in school, to ensure that the children are not involved in cocoa growing projects and they are not being used on the farms. Because the research showed that because the parents were not financially sound, and so they cannot take care of the children, some of them were giving them out early to go and work in the farms. Some were also dropping out in order to act as breadwinners. And some parents who wish to give their children education were unable to do that. So it came up, and then CEA, Complementary Education Agency of the Ministry of Education, collaborated with CARE Ghana, and these parents were given the needed adult literacy and given the vocational training, and also established. And it came out that the children now were free, they were being supported, and the parents themselves also came to appreciate the issue of keeping the children in school. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for that reflection. And I think we have time for just one final question. And I don't know whether, Sophie, we have a question. Oh, I see Doug. Doug is raising his hand. So, Doug, could you go?
Yes, thank you. And I'm sorry, I couldn't find the raise my hand button, so I did it visually. And thank you for this excellent session on out of school programs. It's really been very informative for me, who has not worked in this field. I had more of a request for another session, perhaps. It's on an issue that Patrick and Joa and several others have talked about. All of these programs eventually run into the need for inter-ministry cooperation and coordination. And I wonder if this group could, in the future, look at that issue and how do you actually implement practical steps and strategies to really build those inter-ministry partnerships. And quite specifically, what are really good inter-ministry agreements? How do you get job descriptions for inter-ministry coordinators? How do you involve senior officials in the various ministries to get them truly engaged? How do you engage middle managers in the systems to work together? All those practical and strategic things that need to be done for all of these programs. It's more of a horizontal issue. And I wonder if that could be looked at in the future as one of these sessions. And again, thank you very much for this session. I've learned a lot.
Thank you very much, Doug. So, Patrick, I'm going to ask you to respond to this question. And while doing so, we know that there has been a lot of gender imbalance in the out-of-school issue. And of course, children with disabilities disproportionately affected. So could you let us know what the synthesis says about this, and also respond to Doug's question around could we have platforms where we could be discussing interministerial coordination mechanisms? Thanks. And 2 minutes, please.
Yes. Yes, thank you so much. I think for the first question, it's a very, very good recommendation. I think it's something that all the key players in this are involved in. For those of us on the side of KIX, I think I've seen Dr. Victoria Chisache from UNESCO, but I think this is a very, very good recommendation. It's very, very worthwhile because these are not issues that the Minister of Education alone can address. So I think we take that as a very, very good recommendation that it's a big take home. So in terms of what the synthesis evidence shows around issues of gender and inclusion, so just to let you know that all the applied research projects that are supported by the GPE KIX mechanism initiative are required to have a very strong element of gender equity, equality, and social inclusion. So as a result, definitely there's a lot of focus. There's a lot of focus as well on issues that are emerging regarding whenever it comes to out of school, and our APs are addressing these. We are looking at all those issues regarding gender. For this particular synthesis, I think I can just speak about two good examples that are coming through. I talked about the reduction in early pregnancies, early marriages within Ghana, and I think Dr. Leslie has done that. And I think one of the key recommendations that comes out of that, and that has been also done successfully, is integrating the sexual reproductive health programming in this work, and making that blend to address these issues concurrently. So I think that's a very, very good recommendation that's coming through as one of the things that is emerging. When you look at Bangladesh and Bhutan and Nepal, when it comes to inclusion of children with disability, we see very, very good programs, approaches that have addressed issues specific to disability in these countries. So I think there's quite a lot of issues that are coming through. Please just download the report and go into the details. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Patrick and colleagues. Thank you. And that is all that we had for today. I want to thank you all for rich, engaging discussion, and extending my deepest gratitude to our speakers, starting with you, Patrick, Leslie, and Catherine, and even Patrick from the Complementary Education Agency. I also want to thank Joa for connecting the dots for us, and all of us for bringing in our useful and very insightful thoughts. As we close this, let me emphasize that the GPA KIX is GP's continued commitment to addressing the needs of out-of-school children. So we are building on partner country priorities, where GPE KIX will continue over the next 3 years to generate and mobilize evidence to scale promising approaches and address the challenges of access, retention, and education quality, particularly in emergencies and fragile conflict-affected contexts. So HALA and countries that are under this context, we really hope that the sharing of evidence and solutions can continue to inspire similar from in your country. So I want to thank you, to thank also the participants for the engagement, the good questions that came to the floor, and we hope that the questions that we asked, we were able to respond to them. So thank you all for your time and engagement, and we look forward to continuing this conversation and driving impact together. And now I know that the breakout session will close in about 30 seconds. So wishing you a good day for those who are still in the morning, and a good evening for those who are closing the day like myself. And thank you again.